Picture a bedroom, not your bedroom, not a bedroom from any world you know. Picture a room roughly the size of a tennis court, hung floor to ceiling in crimson silk damask. A fireplace you could park a carriage in, burning oak logs the width of your arm span. Candles, not 1 or 2 but 40, 50, arranged in silver sconces that catch the light and multiply it until the whole room glows amber and gold, and something close to the colour of a fire seen through closed eyelids. And in the centre of this room, raised on a dais like an altar, a bed. A bed with 6-foot carved mahogany posts and curtains heavy enough to muffle the sound of a battlefield. A bed heaped with bolsters and pillows and quilts, stuffed with goose down the depth of your forearm. A bed that cost more than most men in England would earn across their entire lives. And in this bed, propped up at roughly a 45-degree angle, his spine supported by a tower of bolsters, his nightcap slightly askew, his mouth slightly open, is a man, sleeping. And standing around him, arranged at careful intervals in the flickering candlelight, are 6 other people, not sleeping, watching. One stands near the fireplace, watching the flames. One stands by the door, watching the door. 2 more stand at either side of the bed itself, watching the man. Another sits on a low stool near the window, watching the curtains against the dark. And the 6th is you. You're watching his chest, making sure it rises and falls. Your feet went numb about an hour and 20 minutes ago. Your back aches from standing perfectly still. You haven't eaten since 7 in the evening, and it is now, by the clock on the mantelpiece, 2:15 in the morning. The man in the bed breathes in, breathes out. You watch. This is not a prison. This is the bedroom of Edward Cavendish, the 3rd Earl of Ashfield, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England. And this, all of this, the candles, the watchers, the 45-degree angle, the 5 hours you've been standing in this room, this is considered the height of luxury and comfort. Welcome to sleeping arrangements of the English aristocracy in the year of our Lord, 1718. I make these history stories mostly for sleep, and I honestly cannot tell if anyone's actually resting, or if you've all developed a disturbing interest in Georgian insomnia. Either way, get comfortable, pull your blanket up, assume whatever position feels natural, because I promise you it is already, by the standards we're about to discuss, outrageously progressive. Here we go. Let's back up about 18 hours. You arrived at Ashfield House yesterday morning at approximately 10:30, having walked the last 3 miles from the coaching inn at Kempton Green because the carter who took your trunk on ahead refused to wait for you, and the next post didn't leave until Thursday. Your name is Will Marsh. You're 17 years old. You grew up in a village called Thornfield in Derbyshire, which has 1 church, 1 inn, about 40 houses, and the collective wisdom about the wider world that can be summarised as: the city is dangerous, the quality are strange, and never drink the water anywhere south of Leeds. You have, in your coat pocket, a letter of introduction from Mr. George Alderton, Esquire, a solicitor who sometimes did business with the Earl's estate agent, and who knew someone who mentioned that the Earl was looking to expand his household staff. The letter describes you as an honest and capable young man of good Derbyshire stock, quick to learn and diligent in application. You have no clear idea what diligent in application means in the context of what you're being hired to do. You have no idea what you're being hired to do exactly. The letter just said body servant and gave an address and a starting wage of £8 a year, which is more than your father earned in 14 months of farm work. So here you are, 3 miles of muddy road, 1 letter, £8 a year. The gate to Ashfield House appears around a bend in the lane without warning. You stop walking. You have seen large buildings before. You've seen Thornfield's Manor House, which is a fine stone structure with a proper parlour and glass in every window. You've seen Derby Cathedral once from a distance on a trip to market with your uncle. Nothing has prepared you for this. The gate itself is iron, 10 feet high, mounted between stone pillars capped with eagles. Beyond it, a gravel drive curves through parkland towards something in the distance that takes you a full 30 seconds to recognise as a house. It's enormous. Not in the way of things that are impressive at first and then seem smaller on closer inspection. In the way of things that keep being larger than you think they are, no matter how close you get. Pale golden stone. 3 stories of windows, wings extending in both directions, a dome in the centre. You'll learn later that it houses a private chapel that sits above everything like a period at the end of a very long sentence. The kitchen garden alone, you'll discover that afternoon, is larger than the entirety of Thornfield. You stand at the gate perhaps 30 seconds longer than is strictly necessary. Then a voice says, from directly behind you, "You the new lad?" You spin around. A woman of about 60 is standing in the gateway. Not the main gate, a small door cut into the wall to the right that you missed entirely. She's holding a ring of keys the size of your fist, wearing a black dress severe enough to bury someone in, and looking at you with an expression that suggests she has assessed you, reached her conclusions, and is already slightly disappointed. "I'm Mrs. Partridge," she says. "I manage the household. Come through the proper entrance and don't touch anything. The servants' entrance is around the back of the east wing. It leads down 6 stone steps into a corridor that runs the length of the house underground, lit by tallow candles in iron brackets, smelling of coal smoke and boiled vegetables and the particular damp of old stone that has been damp for a very long time. It is nothing like the front of the house. It is also the world you're about to inhabit. Mrs. Partridge walks quickly for a woman her age. You follow, trying not to stare at everything. The corridor opens into a kitchen the size of a barn, vast stone hearths along one wall, copper pots hanging from hooks in the ceiling, a roasting spit large enough to turn a whole pig, which is in fact what it's currently doing, the fat dripping into the pan below with a steady sizzle. 3 kitchen maids are working at a long central table. They don't look up. A boy about your age is turning the spit handle. He glances at you, looks away, glances back. The smell is extraordinary. Fat and fire and onions and something roasting with herbs, and underneath it all the sour ghost of everything that's been cooked in this room for the last 100 years. "You'll eat at the servants' hall," Mrs. Partridge says without slowing. "Breakfast at 6:30, dinner at noon, supper at 8. You eat what's put in front of you. You eat quickly, you clean up after yourself, and you say nothing at table that the upper servants haven't said first." "Yes, ma'am." "You'll address Mr. Gale as Mr. Gale. You'll address me as Mrs. Partridge. You'll address his lordship as my lord, and you will not address him unless he addresses you first." "Yes, ma'am." She stops in front of a door, turns to look at you. Her eyes are grey and quite sharp. "You've been hired as junior body servant. Do you know what that means?" "Not entirely, ma'am." She produces a look that says you are confirming her earlier assessment. "It means you attend to his lordship's person, his clothing, his comfort, his physical needs. You work under Mr. Gale, who's been his lordship's valet de chambre for 23 years, and who will teach you everything you need to know. You do exactly what Mr. Gale tells you, when he tells you, in precisely the manner he specifies. You do not improvise, you do not make decisions, you do not think. A pause. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Gale will explain your duties in the bedchamber separately. There are additional requirements for the night hours. Pay attention when he speaks to you. He will say things once. Then she opens the door, gestures you inside, and is gone before you can ask what she means by additional requirements. The room you've been put in is a small chamber off the main servants' corridor, 2 flights up the back stairs from the kitchen. There's a bed, a real one, narrow but real, not the pallet you slept on at home, a washstand, a small fireplace with no fire lit, and a window about the size of a book that looks onto a courtyard. Your trunk is already here. Someone moved it from where the carter left it. You sit on the bed, the straw mattress, crinkles. The ceiling is close. Outside the window you can hear the sounds of the kitchen garden, someone moving between the rows, the distant clink of a tool on stone. The November morning is grey and close, the sky the colour of old pewter. You are, for the first time since leaving Thornfield 3 days ago, alone. It lasts about 4 minutes. The knock at your door is precise. 2 knocks, a pause, 1 more. Not the knock of someone uncertain, the knock of someone for whom knocking is a professional exercise. Thomas Gale is about 55 years old, lean in the way of men who have spent decades moving silently through large rooms. His face is clean-shaved, his hair powdered and neatly tied, his coat a deep grey blue that you realise after a moment is livery. But quality livery, fine wool, perfectly fitted. He looks at you the way a carpenter looks at a piece of wood that might do, might not. "You're younger than I requested," he says. "I'm 17, sir, nearly 18. I requested 18 or over." He steps into the room, looks around briefly as if checking for problems, then returns his attention to you. "However, you're here. Let's see if you're trainable." He has a way of speaking that is completely without warmth but also without hostility. It's the tone of someone for whom people are components of a system. You're a component that arrived younger than specified. He'll work with what he's been given. He pulls the room's only chair to face the bed, sits down with his back absolutely straight, and folds his hands in his lap. "I'm going to tell you what you need to know," he says. "Not everything. You'll learn the rest through observation, but the essentials now. You fold your hands too. You attempt to look trainable." His lordship, Gale begins, is 63 years of age. His health is managed. 2 years ago he suffered what Dr. Hargreaves describes as an apoplectic episode. Minor, they said. A warning. He pauses slightly on that word. He recovered. His speech returned after about a week. His right hand has some weakness still. He is not, by his own assessment or the doctor's, in poor health. He is, however, in the kind of health that requires careful management. "What does that mean, sir, for my duties?" Gale looks at you steadily for a moment. "It means," he says, "that his lordship sleeps sitting up, by Dr. Hargreaves' instruction. Lying flat, the doctor believes, places undue pressure on the vessels of the head. It was lying flat that he believes brought on the episode 2 years ago." "Lying flat," you say carefully. "As in how people normally sleep." "How common people sleep, yes." Something in his tone shifts. Not quite disdain, not quite pity. It's neither. It's a statement of fact, delivered by a man who has long since stopped being surprised by the gap between lives. His lordship sleeps in a particular arrangement of bolsters and pillows designed by Dr. Hargreaves that maintains an angle of approximately 40 degrees from horizontal. The bed is fitted with the special headboard support for this purpose. When you prepare his lordship's bed for the night, this arrangement must be exact. I will show you the method. You nod. Additionally, Gale continues, his lordship is not to be left alone during the sleeping hours. At any point in the night, if he suffers another episode, someone must be present to respond, to call for Dr. Hargreaves, to ensure his lordship does not fall. You look at him. So, you say carefully, someone watches him sleep. Correct. All night. All night. We rotate. You, myself, Jenkins, he's the night footman. You'll meet him before supper, and one other depending on the roster. The shifts are 4 hours each, beginning at 10 in the evening and running until 6 in the morning. 8 hours. 4 hours covered 3 ways. Simple arithmetic says someone is doing a back-to-back. Who covers the double shift when it falls, you ask? Gale looks at you with the faintest hint of something that might, in better light, be approval. You begin to see the shape of the work, he says. Tonight you'll observe. Jenkins will be your guide. You'll do nothing yourself tonight except watch and listen and learn where you're to stand and what you're to do. What am I to do? Stand still, Gale says. Be present. Watch his lordship breathe. If he coughs, you wake me. If he calls out, you wake me. If he appears to be in distress, sweating, laboured, breathing, his colour changing, you wake me and send someone immediately for Dr. Hargreaves. How do I know if it's serious? You'll know, Gale says. I hope you'll know. A pause. If you're not sure, wake me anyway. I would rather be woken unnecessarily 100 times than not woken once when it matters. He stands. The conversation is over. Supper is at 8. Come to his lordship's dressing room at 9:30. He moves to the door. And one more thing. He turns back. Silence in the bedchamber. Absolute silence. You don't shift your weight unnecessarily. You don't scratch. You don't cough. If you need to cough, you will have learned before tonight to suppress it. You don't speak unless spoken to by his lordship, and his lordship does not speak to body servants in the bedchamber unless he requires something specific. A pause. His voice doesn't change. It never changes. And you don't, under any circumstances, fall asleep. He leaves. You sit on your bed for a moment. You will watch an earl sleep all night, standing up. You think about the £8 a year. You think briefly about Thornfield, about the fields, about the comprehensible shape of a day that begins and ends in daylight. Then you go to find the servants' hall for dinner. The servants' hall is a long, low room off the main kitchen corridor, with 3 trestle tables running its length and benches on either side. A fire burns at one end. 2 tallow candles light the other. The ceiling is low enough that the tallest footman ducks slightly coming through the door. There are, by your count, about 20 people eating dinner when you arrive. You sit at the end of a bench and someone puts a bowl in front of you without being asked. Mutton broth, thick with barley, a heel of yesterday's bread on the side. The bread is dense and slightly sour, and the broth is hot and smells of thyme and onion and the fat off the bones it was boiled from. You eat. Nobody speaks to you. That's not hostile, you realise after a few minutes. It's the way things work here. The upper servants, Mrs. Partridge, Mr. Gale, the cook, a formidable woman with flowery arms named Mrs. Hull, sit at the upper end of the table. The others arrange themselves further down in roughly the order they occupy in the household hierarchy, the newest and lowest at the far end. At your end tonight, you are the lowest thing at the table. The boy who turned the spit sits across from you. Up close he's about 14, freckled, with a permanently surprised expression. His sleeves are singed at the cuffs where they've gotten too close to the fire. "New lad," he says, pitching his voice low. "Yes." "What for?" "Body servant, junior." He gives you a look that contains both sympathy and the survivor's slight satisfaction at someone else arriving to share something difficult. "You've got the night watch," he says. "That's what junior body servant means. Night watch." "It's not only that, night watch," the boy says flatly. "The last one couldn't manage it. Lasted 3 months. Before him, one lasted 6 weeks. You look at your broth. How long have you been here, you ask? 2 years. He sops his bread into his bowl. You stop getting lost in about a month. The house, I mean. He pauses. The job takes longer. How big is it? 47 rooms on the main floors, not counting attics or cellars. I know every inch of the kitchen corridor and the back stairs. The staterooms in the east wing I've never been in, not since her ladyship passed. He says this last part quietly. The death of the Countess 3 years ago, sitting like a weight on everything. You don't ask anything else. After supper you have 3 hours before you need to be at his lordship's dressing room. You use some of that time walking the parts of the house you're allowed in, getting the shape of it into your body. The house is different from the front. The front, the golden stone, the long windows, the parkland, is a statement, a political document in architecture. It says, power lives here, refinement lives here. The finest things that money and taste can acquire are in these rooms. The back says something entirely different. The back says, work happens here, and it never stops. The laundry, where steam comes through the door in a permanent exhalation. The still room, where Mrs. Hull's assistant makes the household's medicines. The butler's pantry, where the silver is cleaned twice a week, each piece wrapped back, in cloth afterward with the care you'd give something irreplaceable. The lamp room, where the wicks are trimmed and the oil measured and the candlesticks polished. The coal cellar, which is everyone's least favourite destination before dawn. A small army of people moving through these corridors from first light to past midnight, keeping the front of the house immaculate and the man at the top of it alive and comfortable. You're part of this now. The thought is strange, not bad, just large, in the way new things are large before you have the language for them. You find a window on the back stairs, small, looking west, and stand there for a few minutes as the afternoon darkens into evening. The kitchen garden below you is grey and bare in November, the beds mulched down for winter. Beyond the garden walls the parkland stretches away into dusk. In Thornfield, this is the time of day you'd be coming in from work, feeding the animals, banking the kitchen fire, your mother at the hearth, the smell of bread. You are 200 miles from all of that. You go back down to get ready. At 9:30, you knock on the door of his lordship's outer dressing room. 3 knocks, you remember Gale's knock, 3 feels right. And a footman opens it and looks at you with the professional boredom of someone who opens doors all day. New lad? Will Marsh, sir. He steps aside. The outer dressing room is about 20 feet by 15. A fire, properly laid and burning well. 2 chairs, a tall clothes press against one wall, a table with a mirror, lit on both sides by candles that are fresh and straight, and casting the cleanest light you've seen today. On the table, arranged with the precision of a surgeon's instruments, are the items of his lordship's evening toilet: a small porcelain pot of tooth powder, a badger hairbrush, 2 glass bottles containing something clear, a folded white cloth, a comb of fine ivory, a pair of small scissors with handles of mother of pearl, every object exactly where it belongs. Gale is already here, standing by the fire. He looks at you, then at the clock on the mantelpiece. 9:30 exactly. He says nothing, which you interpret correctly as approval. There are 2 other servants, the footman who opened the door, and a younger man about 20 you haven't seen before. Thin face, dark circles under his eyes that you think at first are shadows but are, you realise, just permanent. Jenkins, the night footman, he nods at you, not unfriendly. "Pay attention," Gale says. "Do nothing. Tonight you watch." And then the door to the inner dressing room opens, and his lordship enters. You've been trying to prepare for this moment since this afternoon. You'd never spoken to an earl before and weren't entirely sure what to do with your hands or your face. Edward Cavendish, 3rd Earl of Ashfield, is not what you expected. He's a medium-sized man, going heavier around the middle than he probably once was, with white hair cut short beneath his evening cap, and a face that's been handsome once and is now interesting. Creased around the eyes, the jaw softened with age, but the eyes themselves still sharp, blue, and quite alert. He walks with a slight stiffness on his right side, the aftermath of 2 years ago. He's wearing a long brocade dressing gown over his evening shirt and breeches. The outer clothes have already been removed. He looks, fundamentally, like a man who has been performing all day and is now coming to terms with the end of it. He doesn't look at you. He sits in one of the chairs and Gale moves immediately to stand behind him. The footman brings the small table with the toilet items. "My lord," Gale says. "Evening, Gale." His lordship's voice is low and dry. "Who's the new one?" "Will Marsh, my lord, from Derbyshire." His lordship's eyes move to you for approximately 3 seconds. "Marsh," he says. "My lord," you say, and then aren't sure whether to bow or not, and end up doing something in between that is probably not ideal. His lordship looks away, not dismissively, more like a man who has registered information and filed it and moved on. "Dr. Hargreaves this afternoon," Gale says, beginning to work at his lordship's hair. "Was he satisfied?" Satisfied is too strong a word for Hargreaves. He was less dissatisfied than last week, which amounts to the same thing. A pause. "He wants me to take the waters at Bath in the spring." "Very good, my lord." "I didn't say I was going. I said he wants me to." "Yes, my lord." This exchange, you'll learn, is representative. His lordship rarely speaks at length, but when he does, it's precise and frequently dry. Gale absorbs whatever is said and responds in 2 or 3 words. It's a conversation built within narrow limits, those limits established over 23 years. You stand near the door and watch. The evening toilet takes about 40 minutes. Gale combs and powders his lordship's hair, cleans his face, attends to his hands, helps him change from the brocade dressing gown into the bedgown and cap that are his sleeping attire, a long garment of fine white linen, and a cap laundered fresh that afternoon. Every item of clothing has its proper procedure. The bedgown goes on a particular way, left arm first, then right, the collar checked and adjusted, the front smoothed, the cap positioned just so. Gale's hands move with a certainty that has nothing to do with thought. This is a man who has performed this sequence so many times it has moved past skill into something else something almost like a form of prayer. Throughout all of it, his lordship sits quietly. Occasionally he speaks about a letter he'd received once about the state of the North Pasture. Gale answers briefly, hands never stopping. The intimacy in this room, you realise, is very specific. 23 years of this particular closeness. His lordship in the chair, Gale at his back, both of them knowing the next movement before it comes. Not friendship. That's not the right word. And you'll learn here that most of the words from ordinary life don't translate into service, but something earned. Something built from 23 years of witnessing each other at their most unguarded. At 10 minutes past 10, Gale says, "Shall we go through, my lord?" And his lordship rises, and the procession moves into the bedchamber. The bedchamber is everything the outer rooms aren't. You're prepared for the size. What you aren't prepared for is the feeling of it. The room is hung floor to ceiling in crimson damask. Not red, something deeper than red, something that in the candlelight becomes the colour of embers or of heat itself. The carpet underfoot is thick enough to silence every step. The ceiling is painted, a mythological scene, gods and clouds and a naked woman being presented with something important, faded slightly with age but still vivid, and it vaults above you like the inside of a different kind of sky. And the bed, 7 feet wide, 6 feet deep, raised on a low platform, the mahogany post carved in a spiral pattern that runs up to a canopy that nearly touches the painted ceiling. The curtains, crimson damask again, matching the walls, hang on all 4 sides, tied back now but capable of sealing the whole interior into its own private world. The bed is already made up for the night, and even this has its own architecture. 2 long bolsters against the headboard, angled slightly forward. A series of smaller pillows graduated in size below them, creating a slope. The effect is something like a throne, or a throne adapted for convalescence. It looks nothing like how you'd expect to arrange a bed for sleep. It looks like somewhere you'd sit, not lie. The angle is critical, Gale says beside you in a low voice. He holds up a small wooden instrument, a simple protractor, a quarter circle of wood with measurements marked along the arc. Dr. Hargreaves specified 40 degrees above horizontal every night. Before his lordship arrives, after I've arranged the pillows, I check it. If it's wrong by more than 3 degrees, I start again. 3 degrees. The theory, Gale continues, and this is unusual, telling you something that isn't strictly procedural, is that apoplexy comes from too much blood in the head. When a man lies flat, the blood pools. If there's any weakness in the vessels, and his lordship has demonstrated there is, that pooling can cause damage. The pressure builds, something gives. And sitting up prevents it? Reduces the pressure. Gravity assists drainage. A pause. Dr. Hargreaves did not invent the theory. It's been standard advice for apoplectic patients for 50 years. His lordship's father slept at an angle for the last decade of his life. Did it help? For his father? Gale's face doesn't change. His lordship's father died in his bed at 79. A pause. So, yes, by some measure. A footman is lighting additional candles throughout the room, 6 in the wall sconces, 2 on the mantelpiece, 1 beside the bed. The fire in the hearth, which has been burning since afternoon, is now a deep bed of embers that will last the night. The room becomes warm, warmer than the dressing room, warmer than the servants' corridor. The heat sits in the damask, comes back off it, holds. His lordship enters, and here is something you weren't expecting. He looks, standing in this room, exactly like himself, not transformed by the grandeur of the setting. Just a man at the end of his day, moving toward his bed with the purposeful tiredness of someone who's been managing the world for a long time and is glad for the end of it. He pauses at the side of the bed. Gale and the footman move immediately. The footman holds the bedstep, a small padded stool. Gale pulls back the left curtain. His lordship sits on the edge of the bed, then, with Gale's assistance, moves back and up into the bolster arrangement, adjusting himself slightly until he finds the position. It looks, from where you're standing near the door, like a man settling into a very formal chair. Upright, supported, deliberate. Nothing like sleep. "Does he actually sleep?" whispered Jenkins, who's materialised at your elbow. He gives you a look. "Deeply," he says. "Snores sometimes. I've watched him be completely asleep, head dropped forward, proper sleep. And he still looks like he's sitting up to attention," he considers. "You get used to it." His lordship is settled. Gale pulls the curtains half closed on the right side, leaving the left open, enough for the watchers to see, enough for him to see the fire. He tucks a small pillow under his lordship's right hand, which rests on the counterpane, slightly curled, the hand with the weakness. "My lord," Gale says quietly. "Is there anything further?" "No. Good night, Gale." "Good night, my lord." Gale withdraws to his chair near the fire. The footman who lit the candles leaves. 2 remain. Jenkins. You. You take your station near the door. The Earl closes his eyes. And this is the moment. The first time you fully understand what you've been hired to do, when you realise that this is what happens every night. That this room, this warmth, these watching people, this is the arrangement. That his lordship has been sleeping this way for 2 years, or most likely longer in some form, and will go on sleeping this way for however many years remain to him. That somewhere in the long history of this family, in the particular history of this man's life, it was decided that sleep was not a private thing but a managed one. That the body at rest required witnesses. The clock on the mantelpiece marks the half hour. 10:30. You stand very still. Here's the thing about the watching. It didn't start with apoplexy. It didn't start with Dr. Hargreaves and his measuring instrument and his theory about blood pressure. It didn't start with the Earl's minor episode 2 years ago, or his father's larger one 30 years before that. The watch bed has been with European aristocracy for centuries, and it started, as so many things in aristocratic life started, in France. At the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King, the man who turned monarchy into theatre and made Versailles the model for every grand house in Europe that aspired to be something more than just a house, the royal lever and cauchy were the fixed stars around which court life revolved. The lever was the ceremony of getting up. The cauchy was the ceremony of going to bed. And ceremony is precisely the right word. Every morning, in a carefully choreographed sequence, members of the French court were admitted to the royal bedchamber in order of their rank to watch the king wake, wash, dress, and eat his breakfast. The highest nobility had the right to hand the king his shirt. The slightly less elevated could hold a candle while he ate. Further down the hierarchy, you might only be permitted to stand in the outer room, hoping for a glimpse through the door. Being present for the lever was considered an honour. Being absent was a signal, a snub, an indication of disfavour. The king slept, was seen to sleep, was witnessed sleeping, because sleep was part of the performance. The royal body existed in public. There was no version of it that was purely private, and this practice spread. Not identically. No English earl was going to admit the entire county to watch him change his nightgown. But the principle travelled. The idea that the great man's bedchamber was a semi-public space, that servants and attendants had a right and a duty to be present, that the man asleep was still a man who required an audience. And then medicine caught up with theology. The apoplexy problem had been around as long as people had been rich enough to eat badly and stressed enough to have bad hearts. By the early 18th century, as London's physicians became more numerous and more confident, and more willing to issue instructions to their wealthy patients, the medical justification for the watched bed converged with the ceremonial one. You need watchers because you might have a fit. You need watchers because dignity requires it. You need watchers because lying flat will kill you and someone needs to make sure the pillows stay right. 3 reasons. At their root, all the same reason. The body at its most vulnerable, asleep, horizontal, undefended, needs defending. In the great house, that defence is you. You and Jenkins and Gale and however many others rotate through this room every night, standing in the candlelight, watching the angle of the bolsters and the movement of his lordship's chest. Standing there, you become something between a servant and a soldier, between a nurse and a prop in a performance whose audience is partly his lordship himself, the reassurance in the dark hours that someone is there. Jenkins told you later that his lordship sometimes wakes in the night, not in crisis, not in distress, and simply opens his eyes and looks around the room, checking, making sure. And when he sees someone there, he closes his eyes and goes back to sleep. That's the whole purpose of your presence some nights. Just, I am here. You're safe. You can go back to sleep. You don't know that yet. Tonight, you just know your feet are already cold, you're not allowed to move, and you've been awake since 6 in the morning. The first hour is the hardest. Not because anything difficult happens, because nothing happens, and nothing happening at the level of complete stillness is actually quite difficult to maintain. The fire in the hearth settles into itself. A small shifting of wood on ash, a single crack and then silence. The candles burn steadily. No draught in here tonight. Windows sealed, curtains heavy. The clock on the mantelpiece moves its hands in precise tiny increments. His lordship's breathing is audible from across the room, not laboured, not irregular, just the slow, steady rhythm of a man properly asleep. In, out, in, out. You watch his chest. Your feet are on the carpet, which at least means stone is not conducting cold directly up through your thin-soled shoes. But the cold comes from elsewhere, from the outer walls, from the window behind the curtain to your left, from the simple fact that your body isn't moving and isn't generating heat. Your hands are clasped behind your back. Gale demonstrated this afternoon. Hands behind back, not in front. In front looks slovenly. In front suggests you might fall forward. Behind the back is correct. You can feel the bones of your own fingers pressing against each other, small knuckles, the edge of your own thumbnail. On his chair near the fire, Gale is reading. A small book held close to the candle at his elbow. He reads without apparently moving any muscle except the ones required for turning pages, and even those move infrequently. Jenkins is on the far side of the room, near the window. He told you before his lordship came in that the trick to the standing was to shift your weight very slightly, very slowly, one foot and then the other. The movement is imperceptible from the bed, but the blood keeps moving in your legs. He's doing it now. You can barely see it. You try it. Left foot, Right. The carpet absorbs the motion. The candles don't flutter. It helps. A little. 11 o'clock comes and goes. His lordship breathes. 11:30. The fire needs a log. Gale rises from his chair, without sound, the way he does everything, takes a single log from the basket, places it on the fire in one motion that produces the minimum possible creak and settling, returns to his chair. His lordship doesn't stir. You watch the log catch. The new flame runs along the bottom edge of the wood, exploratory at first, uncertain, then finds its footing and settles into a steadier burn. The heat increases slightly. Your face, which was neutral, warms. Your back, facing away from the fire, remains cold. Midnight. You're hungry. The mutton broth at supper was 3 hours ago, and your body is doing the quiet arithmetic of sustained alertness and coming up short on fuel. This is not a problem you can do anything about, so you don't do anything about it. You stand, you watch. 12:30. His lordship moves. Not much, just a small shift, a settling against the pillows, a turn of the head that disturbs the nightcap slightly. His breathing changes for a moment, a deeper breath, a partial exhalation, then back to the regular pattern. You see Gale, across the room, go very still. More still than his normal stillness, if that's possible. You go still too. His lordship breathes in, breathes out, regular. Gale's shoulders, you only notice this because you've been watching him for 2 hours, drop by perhaps 1/4 of an inch. Jenkins, across the room, does nothing. He's been here long enough that a minor shift doesn't register. 1 o'clock. Gale closes his book. You've had a thought forming for the last half hour. You test it carefully, making sure it's the kind of thought you're allowed to have in this room, which means it must be quiet and simple, and require nothing of you except to have it. The thought is this: his lordship looks smaller here than he did in the dressing room. Not physically smaller, he's the same dimensions. But the dressing room had a quality of command to it, even in its private informality. Gale attending him, the ritual of the toilet, the contained certainty of everything in its place. His lordship, in that setting, was recognisably the centre of a system, a man who orders things. Here, he's just someone sleeping. The elaborate bed, the damask, the 40-degree angle, none of it changes the fundamental fact that this is a man who will spend the next 7 hours unconscious, dependent on the thickness of his curtains and the softness of his pillows and the vigilance of the people watching him. Like everyone else. Like you, in your narrow bed in the attic room. Like Jenkins and Gale with his small book. All of you, equal in sleep. Except that you're standing in a cold room watching it happen to him, and he is the one who gets to close his eyes. You file the thought away. It doesn't feel like complaint, just observation, just the thing you see. Gale speaks quietly at 1:20. He looks over at you and gestures. You cross the room carefully, placing each foot down softly on the carpet. You stop beside his chair. He looks up at you, then gestures toward the bed. "What do you see?" he says, barely above a whisper. You look at his lordship, asleep, chest rising and falling, cap slightly crooked from the midnight shifting. He's sleeping, you say. What else? You look more carefully. The angle of the pillows, the position of the hands, one on the counterpane slightly curled, the other at his side, the colour of his face, which you've been monitoring since he lay down. His colour looks fine, breathing's regular. What else? You study the bolster arrangement. Something about the left side. Gale set it with his protractor, but now the left bolster has moved, you say. It looks lower than before. Gale rises without a word. He crosses to the left side of the bed, bends very slightly, examines the bolster arrangement with his hands barely touching, feeling the position in the near dark. He makes an adjustment so small you couldn't say what it was. The bolster rises perhaps an inch on the left side. The angle is restored. He returns. "Good," he says. Quietly, that's all. Just good. But you understand what happened. You spotted something he was also monitoring, something he was already moving to correct. The fact that you spotted it, that you were paying attention in the right way, means something. The angle will shift through the night, he says. The weight of his sleeping redistributes the bolsters. We check every 2 hours. I'll show you the correction method properly tomorrow, but tonight you've seen the basic principle. What happens if the angle drops too far? Below 30 degrees, the risk increases materially. Below 20, a pause. We don't let it get below 20 degrees. You look at the sleeping man. Has it ever happened? That it dropped while everyone was watching? Gale looks at you for a moment. In the candlelight, his face is difficult to read. Once, he says, 3 years ago, before the stricter regime, a previous night footman who'd been drinking. A pause. It didn't result in anything, but his lordship woke in the night considerably lower than he should have been and was not pleased. What happened to the footman? He left the household. Gale's tone makes it clear that the word left is doing a great deal of work. You understand why this matters. Yes, sir. All the protocols, all the watching, it matters because there was a morning 2 years ago when I came to wake his lordship and found him in difficulties. His speech gone, one side of his face not working as it should, his right hand already weakened. I was 2 hours from him when that happened. 2 hours. He pauses, and you hear in that pause 23 years of service, and whatever it means to know that something happened on your watch that you didn't see. I don't intend to be 2 hours away again. You look at him. I understand, you say. See that you do. He returns to his chair. You return to your place by the door. His lordship breathes. Let's talk about what they were actually afraid of. Apoplexy, what we'd call a stroke today, was one of the great terrors of the early 18th century. Not because it was new, but because it was newly documented, newly categorized, newly something that physicians were prepared to have opinions about. The theory was humoral, mostly. The 4 humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, needed to be in balance for health, and excess of any one caused problems. Excess blood in the head caused apoplexy. You could feel it coming sometimes. Flushing, headaches, a pressure behind the eyes. But often you couldn't. Often it just happened. In your sleep. That was the particular horror of it for men like the Earl. They'd watched colleagues, men their age, men of their station, go to bed entirely well and fail to wake in the morning, or wake unable to speak, unable to move one side of their body, diminished. The second Earl of Pemberton, a real man, you'll hear his name mentioned once this week in a conversation between Gale and the cook, went to bed one Tuesday in perfect health, and by Wednesday morning couldn't remember the word for hat. He lived another 4 years, but never held a pen again. The Earl of Ashfield has thought about that man. You can be sure of it. He has thought about lying flat in his bed, his blood pooling in his cranial vessels and waking unable to speak. Or not waking at all. So he sleeps at 40 degrees. He sleeps at 40 degrees and has 6 people watching him, And here's what makes this era different from ours in a way that's almost impossible to recreate from the outside. They didn't know he was wrong. We know now that the elevation doesn't do what they thought it did, that the science was off, that strokes are vascular events whose causes are more complicated than gravity. But in 1718, Dr. Hargreaves's instructions represented the best available medical knowledge, the cutting edge, the thing that would keep his lordship alive. If you had the knowledge and the money to implement it, you implemented it. And the money part is the key. Think about what the watch bed actually costs. 3 to 4 servants awake all night, every night. Staff who cannot be assigned to morning duties because they've been awake since 10, who need to sleep through the morning and are therefore unavailable for the household's daytime needs. Extra candles. The bedchamber burns through 8 or 10 a night just for the vigil. The fire kept at a steady temperature from afternoon to dawn. The elaborate bed, built specifically for the angled posture. The measuring instrument. The physician's fees for the regular consultations that keep the protocols current. This is expensive. Extravagantly, deliberately, visibly expensive. Because that is part of the point. Only a man who can afford all of this can afford to sleep this way. Only a man of the Earl's station has the staff to spare. The room large enough, the bed grand enough, the physician close enough, the social framework in which this is normal and expected and not insane. For the rest of England, for the boy who turns the spit and the woman who trims the lamp wicks and the carter who dropped your trunk at the inn, sleep happens on a straw mattress in a room with several other people, and if you have a stroke in the night, well, someone will notice in the morning. The gap between those two experiences, the watched, measured, medically supervised sleep of the Earl and the rough, unmonitored sleep of his servants, is precisely the gap between their lives. Sleep, it turns out, is a status symbol. The elaborate apparatus of safety that the Earl requires is not only about keeping him alive, it's about displaying the fact that he is someone whose life is worth that much apparatus, that he is the kind of person for whom the night has watchmen. Gale knows this, Jenkins knows this, Mrs. Partridge knows this without perhaps being able to articulate it. You know it too. Standing by the door at 1:30 in the morning with numb feet and a quiet hunger in your stomach watching a man sleep. He is worth watching. You are the proof of it. The clock strikes 2. Gale rises, stretches. One controlled movement, nothing extravagant, and crosses to where you're standing. You'll stay for another hour, he says. Jenkins takes the middle watch. You'll continue until 4, then Armitage comes in for the last shift. What do you do after 2, you ask? And then, hearing something slightly impertinent in it. Sir. Gale looks at you without offence. I sleep for 4 hours. I'm up again at 6 to begin the morning preparations. He says this without self-pity, without the tone of a man expecting commiseration. Just information. The shape of the work. Tonight you observe. From tomorrow you'll be responsible for 1 shift per night. We'll discuss the rotation in the morning. Yes, sir. Jenkins will tell you anything else you need to know. He's been doing this for 2 years. A pause. He also finds conversation difficult when he's tired, so if you have questions, have them at the beginning of the shift, not at 3 o'clock. And then Gale is gone. With his small book and his impeccable silence and whatever quality it is that makes him both entirely predictable and faintly unknowable. Jenkins drifts over from the window side. He give you the lecture, Jenkins says. Several, you say. Jenkins almost smiles. In the firelight, that's a lot. He's all right, Gale. When you've been here long enough, you understand it. He's hard because he has to be, not because he enjoys it. You look at the bed. His lordship hasn't moved since the midnight settling. Does it always go this quietly, you say? Most nights. Jenkins drops into Gale's chair, not with the same quality of occupation, just someone who's been standing too long taking what's available. You get the occasional bad night. His lordship can't settle, or the pillows go wrong, or his breathing changes. Once last winter, I thought we'd be calling the doctor. Went on for half an hour, but it sorted itself. What happened? He was cold, Jenkins says. I should have spotted it earlier. The fire had banked down further than it should, and the room dropped a few degrees, and his lordship's breathing was getting heavy, and I was already halfway to the door to fetch Gale when... He pauses. He opened his eyes and looked at me and said, quite clearly, "Boy, this room is cold," and closed his eyes again. You almost laugh. He was fine? Perfectly fine. We built the fire back up, added another counterpane, and he went back to sleep in 10 minutes. Jenkins leans back. That was the night I understood the difference between a real emergency and a failure of basics. Real emergencies you can't always prevent. Failures of basics you can. Keep the fire burning, you say. Keep the fire burning. Keep the angle right. Keep the candles lit. Keep your own eyes open. He looks at you. If you can do those 4 things, you'll manage the night. And if you can't, then you wake Gale. His lordship breathes in, breathes out. The clock ticks. You stand. There's a time in the deep middle of the night when history and the present moment have a way of merging. You're tired enough that your thoughts become looser, run toward things you hadn't planned to think about. You think about Versailles. Not because you've been there. You've never been further from Thornfield than London, and that trip was brief, and mainly about the coaching. You think about it because Gale mentioned it this afternoon briefly, when he explained the background of the night protocols. Louis XIV, the Sun King. A man who turned the act of sleeping into a political ceremony. The lit de parade, the bed of state, was a piece of furniture that occupied a room at Versailles the way an altar occupies a church. It wasn't always a bed anyone slept in, actually. Sometimes it was purely ceremonial, a place that represented the royal body at rest, a symbol of the king's perpetual presence even in his absence. Visitors were expected to bow to the empty bed, to bow to an empty bed. The bed as stand-in for the body as stand-in for the state. When the king actually did sleep in his ceremonial bed, the grand coucher was the most elaborate form, done on special occasions when dozens of courtiers were admitted in sequence to witness the preparations. But the petit coucher, the ordinary nightly ceremony, still had its audience, its hierarchy, its choreography. The premier gentilhomme de la chambre, the chief gentleman of the bedchamber, the valets, the pages, the chaplain saying prayers, the king's shirt being handed from the highest-ranking nobleman present to the slightly less high-ranking one, who actually helped put it on, because you couldn't let just anyone that close to the royal linen. And behind all of this theatre, what was it for? Control. Not just the king's control over the court, though that was part of it, obviously. At Versailles, being present at the lever gave you access to the king's ear in those unguarded morning moments when he was still half asleep and more likely to be influenced. The men who dressed the king were the men who ran France. But there was another kind of control too, a medical control, a safety. If you're surrounded by people, no one can poison you unobserved. No one can smother you. No one can quietly reposition your pillows to a less favourable angle and leave you to stroke quietly in the small hours. The watched bed is safety. The watched bed is power. The watched bed is both, and neither entirely. And what you're really looking at when you look at it is the peculiar anxiety of the person at the very top of the hierarchy. The person who has everything, including enemies. The person who has so much to protect that protecting it never stops, even in sleep. The Earl of Ashfield is not the King of France, but the logic runs downward from Versailles to every country house in England where a man of consequence has decided that his night requires management. The ceremony scales with the rank. The Earl has 6 watchers. The King had dozens. The principle is identical. 3 o'clock. His lordship shifts again, just his head, a turn to the right, and then a breath slightly different from those before, deeper, almost a sigh. Jenkins is at attention in his chair. You're watching from across the room. The breath normalizes. Jenkins settles. You stand. 4 o'clock. You're 20 minutes from the end of your first watch, and you've started to believe tonight will be one of the quiet ones. The kind Jenkins described as most nights. A long, warm monotony broken only by the clock and the fire. Then his lordship coughs. It's not a small cough. Not the kind you can interpret as a normal sleeping person noise and file away. It's the kind that has weight behind it. That suggests something in the chest that shouldn't be there. Jenkins is out of his chair before the second cough comes. You're already moving. The second cough arrives, and with it, his lordship surfaces from sleep. Not fully awake, not calm but part way up, his eyes opening and his body lurching slightly forward against the bolster arrangement in a way that disturbs the angle. "My lord," Jenkins says, already at the left side of the bed. His voice is low and even. It's all right. Jenkins here. His lordship coughs again. His face in the candlelight has gone from the healthy pink you've been monitoring to something that contains effort. His chest is working. "My lord." Jenkins reaches for the small pitcher of water on the bedside table. You'd noticed it. You'd wondered what it was for, now you know, and offers it. "Take a little water, my lord." His lordship's right hand, the weak one, comes up and takes the pitcher with less coordination than it should, and Jenkins steadies it, tips it slightly. His lordship drinks, swallows, coughs once more, shorter, then again, then stops. You're standing at the foot of the bed. You don't know what to do. You know what Gale told you. If there's distress, wake me. But you don't know if this is distress or something else. And the seconds are passing, and Jenkins hasn't sent you anywhere yet. His lordship lowers the pitcher. Jenkins takes it gently. His lordship's breathing is rougher than before, working harder, but it's there. Both sides of his face are moving. His eyes, open now, are tracking. "My lord," Jenkins says, still in that steady voice. "Are you in pain?" "No." Cracked and dry from the coughing, but there. Winter cough. The air in here is dry. Jenkins turns to you. His face is controlled, but behind it you can see the calculation happening. "The humidifier," he says, gesturing to a small covered pot near the fire that you didn't know what to make of earlier. "Bring it here." You move to the pot. It's warm to the touch. You learn later it contains water infused with eucalyptus oil, kept warm near the fire specifically for nights like this. You carry it to Jenkins, who places it on the stand near the bed's left side. This scent reaches you immediately. Sharp, medicinal, green. The the smell of eucalyptus filling the warm air like something from a different climate entirely. Not unpleasant. Actually, in the cold, dry room, almost a relief. "Better," Jenkins says. His lordship breathes. The working quality in his chest is lessening. "Better," he says, and then he looks at you. "You're the new lad," he says. Your mouth is dry. "Yes, my lord." "Name?" "Wilmarsh, my lord." A pause. His lordship looks at you with the same assessing quality that Gale brought to the angle of the bolsters, evaluating without expression. "Derbyshire," he says. "Yes, my lord." "I knew a man from Derbyshire. Good man." Another breath. "Don't look so alarmed, Marsh. A cough isn't the end of things. I've had this since childhood, every winter." "Yes, my lord." He looks at you for another moment. "You did well," he says, "staying put, not running for the door." "Jenkins had it in hand, my lord." Something in his lordship's face shifts. Not quite a smile, not the right context for a smile, but a softening around the eyes. "Jenkins always has it in hand," he says. "That's his particular gift." Jenkins, who has been attending to the counterpane, does not look up. "Try to sleep, my lord," he says. "Yes, yes." His lordship settles back. The bolsters have shifted. You can see it from the foot of the bed. And Jenkins adjusts them now with practised hands. The angle comes back. His lordship closes his eyes. "Send Armitage in at 6, he says. "I'll want to be up before breakfast." "Of course, my lord." Silence. His lordship breathes. In, out. Slightly rougher than before, but steady. The eucalyptus rises in a faint warm thread from the pot beside the bed. Jenkins returns to his chair. He looks at you. You realise your hands are shaking slightly. Not much, just a tremor in the fingers. "That's what a bad night looks like," Jenkins says quietly. "Not terrible, not the worst. But that's it." He pauses. "You all right?" "Yes." And then, because the shaking is notable, "I was... yes." "First time is always worst," he says. "You don't know yet what it looks like when it's real versus when it's just winter cough. After a while, you know." "How do you know?" "The face changes," he says. "The colour drains out. Not like he's gone red from coughing. That's just coughing. The colour drains and one side of his face goes very still. That's when you run." You look at the sleeping man. "Has it happened? Since you've been here?" Jenkins is quiet for a moment. "Not on my watch," he says. "Not on mine. Not a no. Just not on mine. You stand. You watch." His lordship sleeps. Armitage arrives at 6. A solid man in his 40s who takes in the room with the practised eye of someone who needs no introduction and asks no questions. He positions himself where Jenkins indicates and takes up his station. Jenkins walks you out. The corridor outside the bedchamber is cold after the sustained warmth of the room. You feel the temperature change as a physical fact, your skin registering it before your mind does, the cold pressing through your livery coat, finding your neck, your wrists. "Breakfast in an hour," Jenkins says. "Sleep if you can. You won't manage much." "What about you?" "Same. 4 hours. Then there's things to do." He shrugs. Not complaint, just the shape of the work. It gets easier. Your body adjusts. Does it? Mostly. He gives you a look that's the most honest thing anyone has said to you today. The hardest part isn't the staying awake. It's the in-between, when you've been awake all night and now you're trying to sleep but it's morning and the house is awake and your body doesn't know what it's supposed to be doing. That takes about a month to work out. You walk down the back stairs together. Below, somewhere in the kitchen corridor, you can hear the morning starting up. The scrape of iron on stone, a door slamming, someone calling out a name. Can I ask you something, you say? Probably. Do you think it matters? The angle, the watching? Do you think it actually keeps him alive? Jenkins stops on the landing, looks at you. I think it keeps him from being afraid, he says. That's what I think. Whether it keeps him alive, the doctors know better than me. But he sleeps. He sleeps every night knowing we're there, and he sleeps. A pause. A man who can't sleep will die of that eventually, one way or another. So maybe it doesn't matter whether the angle does exactly what the doctor says it does. If it lets him close his eyes, it's working. You walk down to the kitchen corridor, the smell of bread. You sleep from 6:30 until 9, which is not enough but is what you have. The bed in your attic room is narrow and the blanket is thin, and the November light comes through your window early enough to make sleep a negotiation. You lie there for the last hour in a state that is neither sleep nor waking, somewhere between, listening to the sounds of the house moving around you. At 9:30, you go back. The morning ceremony, the lever, is one Gale asked you to observe this first week, not to participate in yet, just to watch. So you watch. You stand in the outer dressing room with a footman who opened the door for you last night, and through the half-open door to the bedchamber you can see what's happening. Armitage has opened the curtains, both the window curtains and the bed curtains, and the room is full of grey morning light. His lordship is awake, has been awake for perhaps 20 minutes, sitting in his bolster arrangement and looking at the room with the alert quality of a man who has been awake longer than he's admitted to. Gale enters. Good morning, my lord. Morning, Gale. Low and dry. The sharpness of the day not yet fully assembled. What's the time? 9:30, my lord. A grey morning, no frost. This exchange, time, weather, happens every morning. You'll learn that his lordship has asked the same 2 pieces of information every morning for the 23 years Gale has served him. It's not that he can't see the clock or look out the window. It's that the answer from Gale's voice is part of the sequence of waking. The first marker on the path back to being the Earl. Gale begins the morning ritual. The nightcap comes off first, then the bedgown. These are handed to Armitage, who takes them through to be laundered and aired. Gale helps his lordship from the bed and guides him to the chair at the dressing table. The morning toilet is the mirror of the evening one, every item returned to its purpose. The tooth powder, the badger hair brush, the ivory comb working through the short white hair, which is slightly disordered from the night's movements. You recognise the exact direction of the disorder from having watched the midnight shift. The weak right hand is given its morning inspection. Gale takes it gently, examines the grip, tests the resistance by pressing against his palm, watching whether the fingers close. They do, not as firmly as the left. How's the hand this morning, Gale says. Better than yesterday. It's always better in the morning. The elevation helps, not said as reminder, said as a fact, as established and inarguable as the quality of the morning light. More silence, the comb working through the hair, the candles on the dressing table reflecting in the mirror, his lordship's face in the glass looking more like itself now, more like the man who held a room with 2 words and a look, than it did at 4 a.m. navigating a coughing fit. He's dressing now, every layer in its sequence. The linen shirt clean and warm from having been hung near the fire before being brought to him. The stockings, breeches, waistcoat, and then the coat. This morning, a deep green wool, cut in the style of the decade with brass buttons at the cuffs. It fits precisely. Tailored for this body, for this specific configuration of shoulder and chest and waist. When Gale settles it over his lordship's shoulders and makes the last small adjustment at the collar, something happens. His lordship straightens. Not consciously, just straightens. A ½ inch of additional height, the shoulders going back, the whole body reorganizing itself around the coat, as though the coat has reminded it of what it's for. He has become, again, the 3rd Earl of Ashfield. He looks in the mirror. He looks at himself for 3 seconds, long enough to confirm what he sees, not long enough to study it. Not vanity. Just checking that the performance is in order. "That'll do," he says. And Gale says, "Yes, my lord," and steps aside. And his lordship is ready for the day. Gale finds you after breakfast in the servants' hall, still drinking your 2nd cup of small beer, which you should have finished 10 minutes ago. He sits across from you. Unusual, he rarely sits in the servants' hall, and looks at you with the appraising quality you're beginning to recognise as his default expression. "His lordship spoke well of you this morning," he says. "You set down the beer. He mentioned you held your position during the coughing fit last night without making unnecessary sounds. Jenkins managed it, you say. I stood there. That's what I told him you'd say." Something in Gale's face that you can now identify as approval. He said, "Good. Modesty in a body servant is a virtue. Vanity is a liability." He said that. His lordship is a man with considered opinions on household staff. A pause. He's also a man who knows when he's been looked after well and when he hasn't. 23 years of that observation in my experience. You look at him. There are questions you want to ask about the previous night watchman who didn't last. About what Gale actually thinks about the watched bed. Whether he believes in it the way he clearly believes in the protocols for it. But most of these questions are the kind you shouldn't ask yet. One you can ask. Does he mind it, you say? Sleeping that way, being watched? Gale is quiet for a moment. He's been sleeping that way since the episode, he says. Before that, when he was younger, when the Countess was alive, I believe he slept normally. Flat. He pauses. Now he sleeps at 40 degrees with 6 people watching him, and I don't believe he minds it. No, I believe he finds it. He searches. Organised. Organised. His lordship likes things organised. He likes things with a logic, a procedure, a purpose. The bulk protocol, the medical reasoning, the rotation of staff. All of this appeals to him. Not the watching itself, perhaps, but the structure around the watching. The knowledge that there is a correct way, and it is being done correctly. So it's not about the fear, you say, of dying in the night? Oh, it's partly about that, Gale says. Of course it is. He's not a fool, and he knows what happened 2 years ago. He pauses. But I think the fear is managed by the structure. The structure says, here is what we do. Here is how we do it. Here is who watches and when and what they watch for. As long as the structure holds, the fear is contained. He rises. That's why it matters that you do it correctly, he says. Not just because the angle might make a difference. Because the structure makes a difference. He leaves. You finish your beer. A week goes by, then another. November becomes December, and December brings a cold that sits in the stone floors of Ashfield House and comes up through your shoes every morning, and the kitchen fires burn higher, and the coal consumption in the bedchamber doubles, and you add an extra layer under your livery coat on the days you're covering the earliest morning shift. You learn the house. Not all of it. Complete knowledge takes months. But the paths you walk every day, the back stairs, the servants' corridor, The 2 flights up to the attic rooms and the 1 flight down from there to the main house, to the suite of rooms that constitutes his lordship's private apartments. You learn the names. Mrs. Partridge, who runs the household like a general running a campaign, communicating mostly through looks that have the precision of written instructions. Mrs. Hull, the cook, who produces food from the kitchen with a kind of angry talent, as if cuisine were an argument she's been winning for 40 years. Thomas Armitage, who does the early morning shift and is 54 and cheerfully resigned to everything. Samuel, the spit boy, 13, been here since he was 9, who will do any job that needs doing that nobody else wants. You learn what Jenkins meant about the body adjusting. By the 3rd week, you're sleeping in the mornings without trouble. The house noise stopped waking you after about 10 days. Your night watch hunger has resolved itself into a small, tactical adjustment. A piece of bread taken from supper and kept in your coat pocket for the 3 o'clock moment, when your stomach becomes unreasonable. Jenkins caught you doing this the first time and said nothing, which was the same as saying, "Yes, I do that too, and everyone does, and it's fine." You learn the rhythms of his lordship. He sleeps well on cold nights when the fire is high, poorly on wet nights when the damp gets into the house and his chest starts working. He wakes most often around 3 in the morning, never dramatically, just a surfacing, a look around the room, a confirmation that people are there, and then back under. He never speaks during these nocturnal checks unless something is actually needed. He knows your face now. When he opens his eyes at 3 and finds you at your station, there's a small, almost invisible acknowledgement, a recognition. Not warmth, exactly. Something more minimal than that, but real. You are the person who watches him sleep. He is the person you watch. There are no words for the relationship exactly, because it's not quite a relationship. It's more of a fact, like the standing arrangement, like the bolsters at 40 degrees. Just something that is what it is. But you find that you care whether he sleeps well. Not just as a professional matter, though it is that, but actually care. In the quiet way that you care about the fire not going out, or the angle staying right. A low-grade guardianship that doesn't announce itself. You wonder sometimes if Gale felt this, on that morning 2 years ago, when he came in at 6 and found his lordship in difficulties. Whether the professional failure was the thing he suffered, or whether beneath it was something more unguarded. You don't ask. Some things in this house are understood without asking. The 5th of December there's a frost. You know it before you see it. The quality of the cold changes overnight, becoming something drier and harder, and when you cross to the window in your attic room at first light, the courtyard below is white, not snow, just frost coating the cobblestones and the bare branches of the pear tree trained against the kitchen garden wall, making everything look clean and precise and entirely indifferent to your well-being. His lordship's chest doesn't like the frost. By the 3rd night of the cold snap, the coughing is worse. Not the emergency kind, not the crisis kind, but persistent, waking him more than usual, disturbing the structure of his sleep in a way that makes him surface at 2, and at 3, and sometimes at 4, not in distress, but in the flat-eyed irritability of a man who has been cheated of rest. Dr. Hargreaves visits on the 7th of December. You don't attend, it's not your place, but you hear about it from Jenkins, who hears from Armitage. The doctor is pleased with the angle, has concerns about the winter cough, prescribes a new compound, something involving camphor prepared by the apothecary in the village, to be applied in a liniment to the chest before the nighttime arrangements begin. The liniment is applied by Gale, but you smell it in the bedchamber on the 8th of December when you take your station at 10, and it's striking. Medicinal and sharp, like the inside of a church mixed with the inside of a physician's bag, with underneath it his lordship's own warmth, the smell of someone being cared for. He sleeps better that night. In the morning he tells Gale, "The stuff works." Gale says, "I'm glad, my lord," and the liniment becomes part of the protocol. December continues, Christmas approaches. The household atmosphere shifts, not dramatically. This isn't that kind of house. But a small increase in festivity in the servants' hall. A goose announced by Mrs. Hull for Christmas dinner with the air of someone bestowing an honour. A measure of something warm distributed to the lower servants, for which Mrs. Partridge looks as if she's giving away her own vital organs but does anyway. His lordship has a visitor for Christmas. His daughter, Mrs. Cavendish Hall, who arrives with her husband and 2 children on the 22nd and stays until the new year. The great east wing is opened, fires lit in rooms that have been cold since the summer. The house becomes, for 10 days, a different version of itself, larger, louder. The sound of children in the upper corridors, which sit strangely in a house that has been quiet and male and managed for years. His lordship is different in this version of the house. You observe this from a distance. It is not your place to observe him more closely during his family's visit, but you catch him once crossing the hall, speaking to his grandson, a boy of about 6, about something to do with a dog, and there's a quality in his voice that you haven't heard in the bedchamber, an easiness, a loosening of the containment. The night protocols don't change for the visit. If anything, they're stricter. More people in the house means more potential for the routines to be disturbed. Gale is more alert during the Christmas period, checking the angle twice instead of once in the middle of the night. On Christmas night, after the household has been to church and returned and eaten and retired, you take your station at 10 and find the room quieter than usual. Not in a bad way. Just the day settling into the room around him. His lordship, in his bolster arrangement, looks like a man who has been briefly brought back to life by the presence of his family, and is now returning, not without regret, to the shape of his ordinary days. He falls asleep quickly, and this is unusual. In the weeks you've been watching, he doesn't wake at 3. He sleeps at 40 degrees from 10:30 to 6 in the morning, 8 solid hours. When you note it to Jenkins in the corridor afterward, Jenkins nods. "Christmas," he says. "Just that?" "He hasn't always been like this," Jenkins says. "The isolation, the structure. Since her ladyship died, the structure has become more strict, more particular." A pause. "Nights like Christmas, when there's been life in the house, it's like the structure doesn't have to work as hard." You think about that. The structure, the angle, the watchers, the protocols, as a substitute for something else. Something that doesn't require protocols because it just exists, just is. A person, a family, the noise of children, the structure that keeps him safe when the life isn't there, the bolsters holding the angle that a different kind of presence used to hold. Some things in this house are understood without saying. The family leaves on the 2nd of January and the house folds back into itself like a book closing. The east wing goes cold again. The corridors revert to their usual quiet. His lordship's schedule returns to its ordinary shape. Dinner at 4, the evening at his letters or his library, the dressing room at 9:30. On the night of the 3rd of January, you're on the middle watch, 4 to 8 in the morning. The hardest one, the dead hours, when the night is most complete and most indifferent, when the candles are lowest and the fire needs tending most carefully, and the cold is at its deepest before the house begins to stir. Armitage hands off to you at 4. He gives you the brief handover. Breathing's been regular, no coughing in the last 2 hours. The fire's good for at least an hour before it needs anything. Then he's gone, and you're alone with his lordship. This is the first time you've done the middle watch alone. Jenkins has a bad throat, the cold snap catching up with him, and Mrs. Partridge made the decision to let him rest. And you are capable of doing 4 hours alone now. You're 2 months in. You know what you're doing. You take your position. The fire is a deep orange glow, the logs consumed down to their cores. You'll need to add one in about 40 minutes. The candles on the mantelpiece are halfway down. New ones were set at 10. They'll last the night. His lordship breathes. The clock ticks. You shift your weight from right foot to left. The pocket bread is in your coat. An hour passes. His lordship moves at 5:20. Not the alarm kind of movement, the searching kind. A shift against the bolsters, a turn of the head, and then the eyes opening. He looks at the room. He finds you. You give him the small acknowledgement you've learned is appropriate, not a nod too much, not nothing, that's also wrong. A stillness that says, I'm here. Everything is in order. His lordship looks at you for a longer moment than usual. Marsh, he says, nighttime rough. My lord. What time is it? You move to where you can see the clock. 5:20, my lord. A small sound, almost contemplative. He looks at the ceiling. This room is cold. You go to the fire immediately. 2 logs. You'd planned for 1, but 2 is right. You work without hurry, but without waste. The logs take hold. The heat begins. Better, he says after a moment. You return to your station. He hasn't closed his eyes. He's watching the fire, the new flames establishing themselves. The colour of his face is good. You check it automatically. No grey, no unusual quality to his breathing. He's just awake. Do you sleep? He says. You're not certain for a moment whether he's asking you or asking the question generally. My lord. In the mornings, when you've been here all night. Do you sleep? Do you manage it? I do, my lord. It took a few weeks to adjust, but I manage now. A silence. Good, he says. Then, unexpectedly, I used to sleep on my side. You say nothing. You're not sure a response is expected. Before. He doesn't specify before what. He doesn't need to. I slept on my left side. Always. Since I was a child. My wife said it was the only time I looked entirely peaceful. The fire cracks. Now I sleep, he says, like a man waiting for something. A silence. My lord, you say carefully, I think you sleep more deeply than you believe. He looks at you, a slight raising of the brows. Meaning? Meaning? There are nights when you sleep from 10 until 6 without waking. And when you're in deep sleep, my lord, the angle, you search for the words. You seem settled, not waiting, just there. He regards you for a long moment. You've been watching me, he says. Yes, my lord, that's what I'm here for. Something shifts in his face. The line of his mouth changes. Not a smile, not the right context for a smile, but something. Hargreaves is convinced the angle makes a material difference, he says. I'm less certain, but it at least makes me less afraid. That's something. Yes, my lord. Gale told me you asked him about it, whether I minded. You feel the particular warmth of having been discussed. I was curious, my lord. I apologise if... Don't apologise. Flat, not unkind. Curiosity is not an offence. Stupidity offends me. Curiosity doesn't. He looks at the fire again. I once asked Gale if he found it strange, watching a man sleep. What did he say? He said, "My lord, I find most aspects of service strange, but strangeness and wrongness are different things. You turn this over in your mind. That seems right, you say." His lordship looks at you. "Yes," he says, "it does." He settles back against the bolsters. His eyes close. In 3 minutes, he's asleep. The clock marks 6, and you stand. Spring comes. The cold that has sat in the bones of Ashfield House since November lifts in the 3rd week of February, and by March the kitchen garden is showing green at its edges, and the mornings are light early enough to be a comfort. His lordship's chest with the warmer air improves. The coughing diminishes. By April, the eucalyptus pot is retired to the still room until next winter. You've been here 6 months. 6 months of watching a man sleep, and you have learned things that are difficult to explain to anyone outside this specific circumstance. You've learned to read a room from a doorway, to assess, in the 3 seconds between entering and taking your station, the temperature, the light, the occupant, colour of face, rhythm of breathing, position relative to the last check. You do this without thinking now. The assessment happens the way breathing happens. You've learned the specific sounds of his lordship sleeping, the regular breathing of easy sleep, the slightly heavier quality of deep, settled sleep in the middle of the night, the change that happens just before waking, a small quickening, a shift in depth, about 5 minutes before his eyes open. You've stopped doubting this pattern. It's too consistent to dismiss. You've learned in watching another person sleep a great deal about what sleep actually is. The way the face changes, the watchfulness that humans carry in their faces all waking hours, even in repose, even in pleasure, releases in sleep. His lordship is a contained man, careful with his expressions, measured in what he shows. In sleep, something beneath that shows through. The containment relaxes. He looks younger. Not younger exactly, less deliberate. Just a face, just a person. You think about what Gale said, about the fear being managed by the structure. You think about the people who designed this structure, who built the elaborate French court ceremonies around the royal bed, who prescribed the angle and the watchers, who invented the medical theory and the ceremonial practice and the whole architecture of being watched in sleep, all of them trying to solve the same problem. Sleep is vulnerability. Sleep is the suspension of all the defences, physical, political, social, that a waking person maintains. It is the one circumstance under which the most powerful man in England is exactly as helpless as the least powerful boy in Thornfield. The watched bed is an attempt to manage that vulnerability, to surround it with structure, to turn helplessness into a managed performance. It doesn't actually make him less helpless, but it makes the helplessness less frightening, and you, standing here, watching, keeping the fire at the right temperature and the angle at 40 degrees, you are the structure. You are the thing that makes it possible for a frightened old man to close his eyes. That's not nothing. Here's the thing that doesn't get said out loud in this house or any house like it. The elaborate business of the watched bed, the protocols, the rotation, the angle, the physician's measurements, is built on a specific arithmetic. His lordship's peace of mind at night cost you yours, not through any cruelty. He's not a cruel man. Gale is not a cruel man. The system is not cruel, it's just structured. And in a structure this specific, the structure has to be paid for by someone. You sleep in 4-hour fragments. You eat when you can. Your body's rhythms are the inverse of the household's normal rhythms. These are facts you know and accept because the wages are real and the bed is warm and the food is plentiful and you're good at the work. But you notice, in your attic room, lying down after a night watch, that you don't sleep the way he does. You sleep flat. Both of you, in this one respect, are equal, horizontal, deeply asleep, unconscious to the world. No angle, no structure, no watchers. There is no one standing at your door. If you have a coughing fit in the night, you have it alone. If your breathing changes, nobody notes it. If you're cold, you pull the blanket up or you don't. The difference between his sleeping and yours is not primarily about the angle or the bolsters or the medical prescription. It's about this. There is someone whose entire professional purpose is to ensure that his sleep is safe, comfortable, and uninterrupted. There is no one in the world for whom your sleep performs that function. That asymmetry is the fact of service. You don't resent it. Or you do occasionally at 3 a.m. with cold feet and a quiet stomach, and then you acknowledge the resentment and file it somewhere useful, and you keep watching. Because here's the other thing, it's actually quite simple. All the complexity of the protocols and the medical theory and the ceremony and the status, underneath it, it's very simple. He's afraid. He's a 63-year-old man who had a warning from his own body 2 years ago, and the warning said, "You're not invulnerable. You're not permanent. The thing that happened to men you knew. It came for you, briefly, and it will come again, and you don't know when." And in the face of that fear, he has done the most human thing possible. He has organized it. He has turned the fear into a protocol, the protocol into a routine, the routine into a structure so complete and so certain that it can almost, in the best nights, be forgotten. Not overcome, just managed. And the people who watch him sleep are the means by which he manages to close his eyes at all. That is what you are. That is what this is. October. You've been here a year. Tonight is an ordinary night, not a bad night, not a festival night, not a night that will be remembered for anything, just a night in October in a house in Berkshire in the year 1719, with the oak trees in the parkland turning gold and the mornings cold enough to see your breath in the attic room. The fire in the bedchamber is lit by 7. The candles are set. The bolster arrangement is prepared. You do this yourself now, have been doing it for months, and you check the angle with Gale's small wooden protractor and find it precise. Good enough. His lordship comes through from the dressing room at 10:10, goes through his usual sequence with Gale, settles into the bolsters. Gale says, "Is there anything further, my lord?" "No, thank you, Gale." "Good night, my lord." "Good night." His lordship closes his eyes. You take your station. The fire settles. The clock begins its long account of the night. At some point, 10:30, or closer to 11, his lordship falls asleep. His breathing becomes the deep, regular pattern that you know as well as you know your own name. You stand. The candles burn. Your feet are on the carpet. Your hands are behind your back. The bread in your coat pocket will stay there until 3. The room is warm. It's always warm in this room. The fire and the damask and the heavy curtains working together to hold the heat against the October night outside. You'll be here until 2, then Armitage, then Jenkins, who did not after all take the position in Oxfordshire, Some decisions take longer than others, then you again for the early morning, and then the lever, and the morning routine, and the day, and the evening, and the dressing room, and then here again, the same as today, the same as yesterday, the same as all the days stretching out ahead. In the last week of May, something happens to Ashfield House that you weren't expecting. It becomes beautiful. Not that it wasn't beautiful before. The house was always beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, in the way of things that have been carefully made and carefully maintained and never allowed to decline below a certain threshold of splendour. But in May, the parkland does something different. The chestnuts come into bloom along the drive. The kitchen garden fills up from its November bare earth sleep, and by the end of the month there are beans climbing their poles and the first lettuces, and something you don't recognise that Mrs. Hull calls horehound and uses in the medicine she makes for his lordship's chest. The ha-ha at the edge of the formal garden fills with wild flowers that technically shouldn't be there, but are apparently tolerated because the late Countess liked them, and removing them would feel like a second erasure. You learn all of this from Samuel, who is an encyclopedia of the house's history in the way that people who do invisible work always are. Because if you're invisible, you observe everything. She used to walk out there in the mornings, he tells you one afternoon, the two of you sitting on the back kitchen steps while he takes a break from turning a pheasant that has been on the spit for 3 hours. Every morning in summer, first thing, before his lordship was up, just her and one of the maids, pick the wildflowers, bring them back for the breakfast table. You remember her? I was 9 when she died, he says. She was kind to the kitchen staff. Came down once herself to thank Mrs. Hull for a dinner, he pauses. His lordship doesn't do that. You think about the wildflowers still growing in the ha-ha, their small persisting defiance against the formal geometry of everything else. Do you think he knows they're still there, you say? Samuel gives you a look. He walks past them every Sunday morning, he says. In summer, just him, no escort after church. He walks the ha-ha path for about 20 minutes and then comes back in, a pause. He never picks any. Summer changes the bedchamber rituals in small but real ways. The fire goes to a single evening log, just enough to maintain the temperature his lordship prefers. He runs slightly cold, even in summer, a legacy of the stroke, rather than the winter's constant feeding. The heavy damask curtains are supplemented with lighter ones that can be opened before dawn to let in the morning air, which Dr. Hargreaves has approved as beneficial to respiration. The night watch, in summer, has a different quality. Not easier, exactly. Just different. The cold that was your enemy from November through April retreats, and what replaces it is a warmth that is almost pleasant but carries its own danger. The warmth that wants to become sleep. In winter, your body's discomfort keeps you alert. In summer, the candlelight and the warmth and the regular breathing from the bed can conspire against you in a different way. You learn to deal with this by finding something to think about. Not anything active, not anything that requires the kind of attention that would be visible from the bed. Just something to hold the mind occupied at a low level. You find yourself reviewing the day's events, the conversations at dinner, the negotiations in the kitchen between Mrs. Partridge and Mrs. Hull over the menus for the following week, which are conducted with the politeness and underlying inflexibility of two nations discussing a border treaty. The letter his lordship dictated to Gale this morning, and which Gale read back twice before his lordship was satisfied with the phrasing. You find yourself thinking about Thornfield Moor in summer, not with longing exactly, more with the quality of looking at something from a height. The village making sense in a way it didn't when you were in it. Its smallness now comprehensible, its rhythms recognizable from outside. The harvest coming in August, the fair in September, the whole year turning on the same pivot points it always had. You're not there, you're here. And the difference between these two sentences has, over 7 months, become something you've settled into rather than something you're still measuring. Here's something Gale tells you in June, on an evening when his lordship has gone to dine with a neighbouring baronet, and the household has what Mrs. Partridge describes as a quiet night, meaning work continues as normal, but the specific pressure of the Earl's presence lifts for a few hours. You find Gale in the bedchamber checking it, making sure everything's in order for his lordship's return. The bolsters haven't been set yet. It's only 5 o'clock, but Gale is checking the state of the room the way a surgeon checks his instruments before an operation. You're curious about the bed, he says, without turning around. He says it the way he says most things, as a statement, not a question. Because Gale has already arrived at the conclusion you're still approaching. I was thinking about it, you admit. He turns, looks at the bed for a moment from the foot of the room, the way you've seen his lordship look in the mirror in the mornings, not studying it, just confirming it. The bed is older than the house, Gale says. The current house was built by the second Earl in 1692. The bed came from the previous structure on this site, which burned down in 1688. The frame and posts survived because they were stored in the stable block. Everything else burned. A pause. When the new house was finished, the second Earl had the bed restored and reinstalled in the new bedchamber. He could have had a new one made. He chose not to. You look at the mahogany posts, the spiral carving, the canopy. How old is it? The frame is from approximately 1640, possibly earlier. The carving was added in 1650 when it was restored after the Civil War period. The counterpane is 30 years old. The mattresses are replaced every 15 years. He pauses. The bolsters are replaced every 5. You do the arithmetic. The frame of this bed was built before the king, whose court invented the watch-sleep ceremony, was even born, before Versailles was anything more than a hunting lodge, before the word apoplexy was a medical term anyone recognised. Why does it matter, you say? That it's old. Gale looks at you. Because it represents continuity, he says. The same bed in the same room, generation after generation. His lordship's grandfather slept in it. His father slept in it. His lordship was born in it. A pause. And his lordship sleeps in it, knowing all of that. Knowing that when he closes his eyes, he closes them in the same place that 3 generations of Cavendishes have closed theirs before him. You look at the bed. That's what the ceremony is partly about, you know, Gale continues. Not just the watching, the place, the specific place. At Versailles. You've heard about the French court? You nod. The bed at Versailles occupied the same position in the room for 60 years. The king slept in the same spot. When he travelled, when he was at other palaces, the first thing established was a bed in the correct position, oriented the same way. The certainty of the place mattered as much as the certainty of the people watching. The place's structure, you say. Gale gives you the look that is his version of a nod. The place's structure, he says. The same walls, the same light, the same sounds. You've noticed he can sleep through nearly anything in this room, but woke twice at Bath when there were unfamiliar noises from the street. You had noticed. You'd filed it away as a bad night in an unfamiliar place. Now it makes a different kind of sense. If the place changes, Gale says, the structure has to work harder. At home, the structure and the place work together. Which is why... He gestures at the bolsters, the fire irons, the measuring instrument on its hook, all in their specific locations. Why everything has its place. Exactly its place. Always. You understand something that you didn't quite understand before. The protocols aren't just medical, they're architectural. They turn the room itself into a form of safety. That's why he checks, you say. When he wakes at 3, he's not just checking that someone's there. He's checking that everything's where it should be. Gale looks at you for a moment. You've learned to see, he says, simply. He turns back to the room, resuming his check, and the conversation ends as Gale's conversations always do, without announcement, without ceremony, just completed and over. You stand in the bedchamber for a moment after he leaves. The room is empty of its occupant. The bolsters wait in their daytime position, not yet arranged for the night. The fire is unlaid, the candles are unlit, but the room already knows what it is, already holds the shape of what happens here. You can feel it. His lordship goes to Bath in June. Not willingly. Dr. Hargreaves's instruction, persistently renewed each week for the better part of a year, finally achieving sufficient repetition to be acted upon. He's going because he's tired of hearing about it, Gale tells you, with the tone of a man who's been present for every conversation on the subject. 3 weeks, then we come back. We, you say? The travelling household, myself, Armitage, Jenkins, you. A pause. And Mrs. Partridge, who finds Bath vulgar but whose presence is non-negotiable. You've never been to Bath. The journey takes 2 days by coach. The Earl's own vehicle, a dark blue carriage with the Ashfield arms on the door, adequately sprung for a man of 63 who's instructed not to allow himself to be excessively jolted. You ride on the outside box, which is technically your station, which is cold in the early morning and hot by midday and bumpy throughout. But there's the countryside. You've forgotten, in 7 months of underground corridors and candlelit chambers, how much you missed simply being outside. The road through the Berkshire Downs in early June is something you can only understand by being on it. The chalk hills going white and green in the early morning, the smell of grass and something flowering in the verges, the light entirely different from the managed light of the house. Wider, less intentional, just itself. You grip the box rail and watch England go past and think about how small a section of it you've been living in. Bath itself, arriving in the evening of the second day, is nothing like anything you've seen. The city has been recently rebuilt in a pale golden stone that makes Ashfield House look almost modest by comparison. Terraces of houses rising in curves along the hillside, everything in the same stone, everything matching, creating an effect that is simultaneously grand and strangely harmonious, like a city that agreed on one principle and followed it through completely. Wide streets, an elegance that is both formal and relaxed, as if the city is on holiday but has hired a competent architect to manage the holiday. The lodgings taken for the Earl's household are in one of these terraces on a curved street called something you can't quite make out from the letterhead. A good address, Armitage tells you, not the grandest in Bath but respectable, close enough to the pump room for his lordship's required morning visit. The pump room. This is where the water that everyone is in Bath to drink is served. It smells like eggs, not faintly, not as background. As the immediate, dominant, inarguable fact of the place, a mineral sulphurous warmth that reaches you in the street outside and intensifies as you cross the threshold into the large, light-filled room where the fashionable sick and the fashionable well are gathered in their morning clothes, taking their prescribed cups and conducting the social business of being seen to take their prescribed cups. His lordship drinks his with the expression of a man performing a necessary task. His face shows nothing except the faintest tightening around the mouth, the expression of someone who is doing the right thing and is thoroughly uninterested in enjoying it. "How is it, my lord?" you ask, because you're close enough today, and the pump room is noisy enough that you risk the impertinence. He looks at you. "Imagine that a stone had opinions about what you should drink," he says, "and those opinions had a flavour." Then he drinks the rest of it in one go, as if speed were the point, and hands the cup back to the attendant without another word. You learn over 3 weeks that Bath has its own rhythms. Morning, the pump room, the prescribed 3 cups drunk with the focused efficiency of a man completing a task. Then, if the weather is good, a walk in the grounds. Late morning and noon, visitors. Bath is the place where England's gentry and nobility gather to be ill together, which means that for the first time in years, his lordship is surrounded by people of his own kind, men who knew him 20 years ago, men he did business with. The odd woman of his mother's generation who looks at him with the particular quality of old acquaintance that contains years of unreachable context. He is, you realise during these Bath weeks, a more social creature than the quiet isolation of Ashfield House has allowed him to be. Not warm exactly, that's not his register, but interested, present in a different way. The dry wit, which at Ashfield appeared occasionally and briefly, surfaces more often here. He makes people laugh, not often, not trying to. Just the occasional well-placed observation that catches people at the right moment. You watch this from a distance, which is your station. Afternoons, the library, letters, or sometimes the assembly rooms when there's music worth hearing. His lordship's views on music are specific and not negotiable. Handel is acceptable, Italian opera is acceptable, anything written in the last 15 years requires scrutiny. He explains this once, briefly, to a young woman who makes the mistake of asking his opinion on a new composition she admires. Young music, he says, is like young wine. Some of it is excellent. Most of it is simply young. The young woman looks uncertain whether she's been complimented or insulted. Both, probably. That's his lordship's method. Evenings, dinner, sometimes at home, sometimes at the lodgings of other visitors, and then the return to the terrace house, and the ritual of the dressing room, and then bed. The night protocols in Bath are different from Ashfield in one important way. They are conducted in an unfamiliar space. The lodgings are good. Mrs. Partridge ensured that the bedchamber was examined and approved before his lordship arrived. The bed, brought in pieces from Ashfield specifically for this trip, has been reassembled and set in the correct orientation. The measuring instrument was in Gale's coat pocket for the entire journey, wrapped in chamois leather so it wouldn't be damaged. Everything is as it should be, but it's not Ashfield. The room is lighter than Ashfield's chamber, paler walls, smaller windows that catch the street sounds, the noise of Bath's nighttime social world drifting up from below. His lordship can sleep through most of it, you discover, but there's a specific sound, a carriage horse's hooves on the stone street at a particular rhythm, that wakes him every time. Something about the regularity of it, maybe. Too close to the sound of a clock. too close to the sound of something being counted. When it wakes him, he doesn't call out. He just opens his eyes, locates you or Jenkins or whoever is on the watch, and then waits for the sound to stop, and then closes his eyes again. You mention this to Jenkins one morning. Jenkins nods. First 2 nights, he says. Then he gets used to it. He always does when we travel. A pause. The first 2 nights anywhere new are the hardest for him. The structure's right, but the room's wrong. After that, his brain accepts the new room and the structure carries it. Does he know that about himself? Jenkins gives you the look he gives you when you ask things he considers obvious. He's been sleeping at 40 degrees with 6 people watching him for 2 years, Jenkins says. He knows everything about himself. That's what the protocol does. It makes him pay attention to his own sleep in a way most people never do. On the 3rd night at Bath, his lordship sleeps from 10 until 5:30 without waking. When you report this to Gale in the morning, Gale says nothing. Just makes a small note in the book he keeps, a leather-covered journal that you've never been invited to read, but which contains, you understand, a record of every significant event of the night watches going back years. 1 entry per night. The weight of years in that small book. On the last evening at Bath, a Tuesday in late June, his lordship attends a concert at the Assembly Rooms and returns, in a better mood than you've seen since Christmas. Not effusive. He's not built for effusive, but quietly something. A settledness. In the dressing room, removing the evening coat, he says to Gale, Hargreaves will be insufferable. My lord? He'll say the waters worked. He'll attribute everything to the waters, the sleep, the chest, the hand. He holds up his right hand, flexes the fingers. You can see from across the room that the movement is freer than when you arrived. Measurably freer. He'll take credit for what 3 weeks of not being alone have actually done. A silence. Gale says, The waters may have assisted, my lord. The waters taste like a geological opinion about my mortality, his lordship says. What assisted was the people. He says it simply, without apparent self-pity or self-awareness. Just a statement of fact the way he states everything. Gale helps him into the bedgown. I thought you found Bath vulgar, he says. I find it necessary, his lordship says. Those are different things. A pause. One can find something necessary and still wish it were better. He goes to bed. He sleeps well. In August, Jenkins comes to find you in the attic room on a Sunday morning when neither of you is on duty and you're reading. Not well, and not for long, but with the determination of someone who has decided that £8 a year should come with self-improvement. He sits on the foot of your bed. I didn't take the Oxfordshire position, he says. I know, you say. You mentioned. I mean, I've decided not to go. Settled it this week. He looks at the window, the small one that looks onto the courtyard, the pear tree now carrying fruit. I got as far as writing the letter of inquiry, got the thing half done, and then I thought about... He stops, starts again. I thought about what it would be to go somewhere where it's simpler, where the night watch isn't the whole job and the master's in good health, and you can sleep properly and have evenings that are actually evenings. That sounds like a reason to go, you say. It does, doesn't it? He's quiet for a moment. And then I thought about the alternative, about what it would be to do that for 10 years, 20, to do the simple version for 20 years and be good at it and have nothing much to show for it except that it was simple. You set down the book. This is hard, you say carefully. It's hard, he agrees. It's also the most. He searches for the word and doesn't quite find it. It's the most real thing I've ever done. Does that make sense? The watching. What we do in that room, it matters in a way that I can see. Every morning when I walk out and he's alive and he's had a decent night, it matters. And I'm good at it. I'm genuinely good at it. You think about what you told his lordship months ago from your station in the candlelight, because it matters. What I do here, it matters in a way I can see. You're not going, you say. I'm not going, Jenkins says. He stands, picks up the edge of your book, looks at the title, a historical account of some parliamentary session, borrowed from the library room with Gale's grudging permission. Any good? Terrible, you say. But I'm learning things. Jenkins almost smiles. It's more than usual. August is good for that. In the 3rd week of September, his lordship has a real bad night. Not the worst, not the episode that Gale was 2 hours away from, but close enough that you understand, for the first time with full certainty, the difference between the drill and the thing the drill exists for. It begins normally enough. His lordship to bed at 10:15. The usual arrangement. Gale on the first watch, you taking over at 2. At 2:15, Gale walks you through the handover. Everything's been quiet. No coughing, breathing regular. The angle is good. He checked it at midnight, and again at 1:30, and it's held. Gale leaves. You take your station. At 3:20, his lordship begins to sweat. You see it before anything else registers. The candlelight catching a different quality of moisture on his forehead, on the skin above his collar. The kind of sweat that doesn't come from heat. The room is warm, the fire is right, but this is something else. Cold sweat, though you're across the room and can't yet be certain. His breathing has changed. Not dramatically, not the laboured, effortful sound of the winter cough. Something more subtle, a fraction faster than before, a fraction shallower. You're at the bedside in 6 steps. Silent. The carpet absorbing every movement. You look at his face. His colour is wrong. Not grey. Not yet. Not what Jenkins described. But the healthy pink that you've been monitoring for 10 months has gone to something flatter. Something that is not the colour of life in the usual way. His right hand on the counterpane is moving. Not purposefully, just trembling slightly, in a way you've never seen before. You don't run. You don't wake the house. You do what Gale told you to do in October of last year. You put your hand very gently on his lordship's shoulder, not shaking him, just there. Contact, the most basic possible signal. Someone is here. You're not alone. My lord, you say, quietly, steadily. He doesn't respond. His breathing continues its wrong rhythm. My lord, a fraction louder. You press his shoulder slightly, not a shake, but firm enough to feel. His eyes open. They're not right. For a moment, just a moment, they don't track. They're open, but they're somewhere else. Your heart is doing something significant. Then they find you. Marsh, he says. His voice is wrong, thick. The word took effort. My lord, I'm here. A silence that lasts 3 seconds and feels like considerably longer. Something, he starts. His right hand comes up from the counterpane slowly, the trembling more visible now. Something is, I'm going to get Mr. Gale, you say. Steady, steady. I'm not leaving the room, Jenkins. You don't raise your voice. You don't need to. Jenkins is 4 feet away, on the stool by the window, already at attention. Jenkins crosses to you in 2 strides, takes one look at his lordship's face and says, Go. You go. You're down the corridor and up the back stairs and at Gale's door in under 30 seconds. You knock. 2 Pause. 1. The signal. Gale opens the door. He looks at your face. Dr. Hargreaves, you say. Gale is dressed in 4 minutes. Dr. Hargreaves, who lives in the village, whose arrival on an emergency was planned for and practiced, whose route to the house is known and whose knock at the back door is answered within 30 seconds of arrival, is there in 20. You stand in the corridor outside the bedchamber for those 20 minutes. You stand completely still. Your hands are not shaking this time. You find, to your own surprise, that you're not frightened. Not in the way of fear that makes you useless. You are concentrated, held together by the protocols, by the things you know how to do, the things you did do, and now the things you wait for, which are also things you've been trained to do. Jenkins is in there with Gale. Dr. Hargreaves arrives and goes through. You wait. At 3:55, Gale opens the door. He looks at you. He's all right, he says. Not fine, all right. The distinction matters. What was it? An irregular episode of the heart, Dr. Hargreaves believes. Not an apoplexy, the signs are different, he says. He uses the medical term you won't remember in the morning. A disturbance of rhythm, not the stroke we feared, but serious enough. A pause. You acted correctly, Gale says, making contact, waking him, coming for me. Jenkins had it, you say. Jenkins had it, Gale agrees, and you had Jenkins. You look at the closed door. Will he? He'll sleep. Dr. Hargreaves has given him something. A pause. We'll know more in the morning. In the morning his lordship is pale and quieter than usual, but he is himself. He can speak. Both sides of his face are working. His right hand has its usual weakness, no more than before. Dr. Hargreaves sits with him for an hour, makes adjustments to the protocol, a different position of the arm at night, something about the angle of the head, a prescription for a tonic to be taken with the evening meal. At the end of the hour, his lordship says, Hargreaves. Dr. Hargreaves looks up from his notes. The boy, his lordship says, the Derbyshire lad. Will Marsh, my lord? He made contact before he raised the alarm. A pause. That was right, was it? Dr. Hargreaves considers this. Grounding contact during a cardiac episode, he says, has been observed to have a settling effect on some patients. The presence of touch. He pauses. It may have prevented panic, which would have worsened the episode. That's what I thought, his lordship says. He closes his eyes. Tell him, he says. Gale tells you that. Afternoon. In the servants' hall, with the same brief economy that he tells you everything. His lordship wanted you to know that you did the right thing. You don't say anything for a moment. How is he, you ask? Better than he was at 6 this morning, Gale says. Better than he was at 4. A pause. He'll be fine, Will. It's the first time Gale has used your given name. October. You've been here a year. And this time, this 2nd October, you know what a year here means. You know the liniment smell of winter coming. You know the quality of the cold that seeps through the attic window in November, different from the cold that seeps through it in January, different again from the cold of March that's starting to think about leaving. You know which step on the back stairs creaks in wet weather and doesn't in dry. You know that Samuel the Spit Boy is going to be something useful when he's older. There's a quality of observation in him that needs somewhere to go. And you've taken to having him alongside you on the simpler errands so he can start learning the upper house geography. You know the sounds of his lordship sleeping. All of them. Every register, every deviation from the normal pattern. Every small adjustment that means comfortable and every one that means checking required. You know them the way you know your own heartbeat, not because you've studied them, but because you've been present with them, night after night, until they've become part of the map of what you know. And his lordship, you think, knows you. Not as a person exactly. The structure of service doesn't quite allow for that, and neither of you would be comfortable if it did. But as a presence, as the specific quality of attention that you bring to his room at your specific hours of the night. Last week, this is not something you've told anyone. He woke at 3 and found you at your station, and he said, before closing his eyes again, "Good." Just that, just good. And you understood, in that good, a year of accumulated reliability. A year of the angle being right, and the fire being maintained, and the presence being consistent, and the protocols being followed, not because you had to follow them, but because you understood what they were for. He slept. You watched. November comes, and the liniment comes with it. The smell fills the bedchamber again, that churchly medicinal sharpness, and you find that you've missed it, in the way you miss things that mark a return rather than an ending. The eucalyptus pot comes out of storage, the fire goes back to its winter intensity, the checking of the angle doubles, his lordship's chest starts its winter work. But this year, and you notice this, though you say nothing about it, this year the coughing is less severe. The episodes that woke him 4 or 5 times a night last December come only 2 or 3 times. The sweat that preceded the September crisis has not returned. He is, if not better, more stable. Dr. Hargreaves, at his December visit, uses the word managed. His lordship, hearing this word, says, "I thought satisfied was the best you could offer." Dr. Hargreaves says, "Managed is better than satisfied." His lordship thinks about this. "I'll allow it," he says. The Christmas visit, his daughter again, the grandchildren again, the house briefly full of light. You stand your watch on Christmas night and watch him sleep 8 hours without surfacing the way you did last year, and you think, this is the second time. This is already a pattern. This is already something that has happened more than once and will happen again. You realize, accumulating time here. Not in the way of someone passing through, in the way of someone staying. The thought is strange, not bad, just large, still in the way that things are large when you're still finding your edges, but smaller than it was a year ago. On a Tuesday in January, a quiet night, nothing wrong, nothing different, just the regular turning of the watch. You stand at your station and you think about sleep, not about watching it, about having it. You think about every person in this house asleep right now. Mrs. Partridge in her room off the housekeeper's corridor, sleeping on her back because she always sleeps on her back, with her keys on the table beside her bed and her Bible on the chair beside that. She's never told you this. You know it from the 1,000 small details that accumulate when you live inside someone else's household. Mrs. Hull in the cook's bedroom near the kitchen, probably on her side, probably warm. The kitchen fire keeps that end of the corridor warmer than any other part of the house. Samuel in his corner of the attic, curled up like a dog, shoes off but still dressed in most of his clothes because the attic is cold and it's faster in the morning. Gale, for these 4 hours, somewhere in his own room, sleeping with the same economy of movement he brings to everything. Jenkins, who is not on duty tonight, sleeping however Jenkins sleeps. You've never watched him sleep and don't intend to, but you imagine it's the sleep of someone whose body makes no unnecessary demands. All of them, all of you, and then him, at 40 degrees, in his magnificent bed, in his magnificent room, with his measuring instrument and his protocols and his year-old memory of a Tuesday night in September, when you put your hand on his shoulder and said his name. You think about the whole length of human sleep, about how many people across how many thousands of years have lain down in the dark and closed their eyes and trusted that the world would be there in the morning, or not trusted, some of them, a great many of them, lying awake in the dark and not trusting and finding that the darkness confirmed their fears. And the ones who were afraid, they did what the Earl has done. They made themselves watched. They built fires and kept guards and invented prayers and arranged their pillows at precise angles and hired people to stand in candlelight and count their breaths, all of them trying to solve the same problem. The problem is this: consciousness ends every night, and every night consciousness ends is another night that things go wrong in the dark, and there is no way, finally, to watch yourself sleep. You need someone else for that. You need someone whose wakefulness you can borrow. His lordship has 6 people. Most of the world makes do with what they can find: a spouse's warmth, a child in the next room, the sound of a familiar house settling, the knowledge, approximate, unprovable but held, that someone nearby would notice if something went wrong. It's not enough. It's never quite enough, but it's what there is. And on the very best nights, the Christmas nights, the Bath nights, the October nights when everything is right and the angle is correct and the fire is good and no one has a cough, it becomes enough, more than enough. He sleeps. You stand. Stand still for a moment. Not you, standing by the door in 1718. You, here, now, in your bed, under your blanket, in whatever position feels natural. 45 degrees? Probably not. Watched by 6 people? Almost certainly not. But you're here, and it's late, and the day is over, and what remains now is only this: the permission to close your eyes. Think about what we've covered tonight. A man afraid of dying in his sleep who turned his fear into a system. 6 other people's lives, organised around that fear. A bed 400 years old. An angle measured to within 3 degrees. A smell of eucalyptus in the winter dark. A boy from Derbyshire learning to read a room from a doorway, to recognise the colour of a healthy face, and the colour of one that needs attention. All of it in service of one thing. He slept, night after night, in his elaborate arrangement, with his watches and his protocols and his measuring instrument and his 40-degree angle. He closed his eyes and he slept. And the sleep was not perfect, and there were bad nights and crisis nights and September nights that nearly became something worse. And there was Christmas when his grandchildren were there and he slept 8 hours straight, as if fear were something that could take a holiday. But mostly he slept, because someone was there. Outside this room, the house breathes around you. The kitchen corridor 2 flights down, where the fires will be lit at 5 and the bread will begin. The attic rooms where the others sleep in their ordinary horizontal peace. The kitchen garden, frost-edged in October, always there, always marking the edge of the house's world. The parkland beyond, and beyond that, the road. In 300 years, a family won't sleep in this room. This room might not exist. The house might be a museum, or a school, or ruins, or still a house, but changed beyond recognition. The damask replaced, the painted ceiling painted over, the great mahogany bed dismantled and dispersed. Dr. Hargreaves's measuring instrument in some collection somewhere, its purpose no longer remembered. But somewhere in the October dark, someone will be watching over someone else's sleep. A parent in a doorway, listening for breathing. A hand resting lightly on a shoulder in the dark. A phone left on in case someone calls. The tools change. The fear is the same. And the watching is the same. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a roof and a blanket and whatever small warmth the night allows, and someone, somewhere, who would notice in the morning. That's more than a lot of people have. That's enough. That's enough. The sounds of the night grow fainter, or maybe you're just listening less. The boundary between waking and sleeping starts to blur, the way it does when you're truly tired, when your body has decided that consciousness is no longer required and begins, in its quiet accumulated way, to take back the hours you owe it. Somewhere out there, the world continues. The night watchmen walk their rounds. The fires burn down to their cores. The watermen count their coins. And you, wherever you are, whatever year it is, whatever distance from Ashfield House or Versailles or Thornfield or any place where someone once stood in the candlelight and watched over someone else's fear, you deserve this rest. The day is over, the structure held. Let sleep take you the way it took Will Marsh in his attic room on Ashfield Estate in the winter of 1718, in the hour after his watch ended. Let the world fade. Let the noise quiet. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. Tomorrow there will be the same walls, the same light, the same people, the same work, but that's tomorrow. Right now, in this moment, there's only this. The long, slow drift. The warmth of the blanket. The sound of your own breathing. In, out, in, out. You don't need to watch. Not tonight. Not you. Good night.